welcome. There are at least two reasons, maybe more, why we always start with stillness. One is that I love stillness. The second reason is that I don't know what I'm going to say. Now, sitting in front of an audience and not knowing what to say could be a nightmare. If I thought I should know what to say. But it's not a nightmare if I am comfortable with not knowing what to say. Then it's actually quite pleasant. And that is the state of consciousness in which conceptual thinking is not that important anymore. You may have heard the story of the disciple who asked the Zen master, or rather, the Zen master asked the disciple in the usual Zen way, which can sometimes seem a little bit abrupt. The master asked, "Do you understand Zen?" And the disciple said, "No, master, I don't." And the master said, "Neither do I." And here you can see the two different modalities of not knowing. The disciples not knowing and the master's not knowing. Now, as you sit here, you can be either a disciple or a master, listening to yourself. There's content, the content of your mind, which consists of thoughts. And most people have the need to fill up their mind and their life with more content. It's a compulsion, almost an addictive searching for more stuff to identify with, so that you can increase the content of things that the mind identifies with. So most people carry around content in the mind in the form of thoughts, bundles of thoughts that contain a sense of self, that you identify with, or in the words of Don Miguel Ruiz, that you have faith in. And that's all they know. Their life consists of content, both externally, one could say, everything absorbs their attention continuously, stuff, things to acquire, things to be worried about, things to do, problems, and thoughts one after another. You have to think about this and this and this continuously. So your entire inner space is filled up with content. No breathing room. A room full of stuff. And that's the self. There's a self-identification with stuff, which ultimately is the mind, thought stuff. And you feel you're choking to death almost. Life is experienced as frustrating and bringing up one dilemma after another. So the essence of our gathering here is to find the inner space that is there, although you may have accumulated a lot of content in your mind, there is always behind it or underneath it a vastness of inner space or stillness. Even in the most nervous and irritated and hyperactive human mind, even there underneath, there is a dimension of stillness. You just have to look for it, to feel it, to sense it within yourself, underneath all the stream of thinking. And the stillness is the gap between two thoughts, for example, right now. What I'm saying right now is not that important. All the words I'm using are pointing to the gaps. I could be telling you fascinating stories. Sometimes I do. But here, all the words are really pointing to the gaps, to the space behind the words or in between the words. And I'm directing your attention to the space within. Becoming aware of it. And we're saying that because we're using language. It's not so much that you become aware of the space or that you become aware of the stillness. You are that. There isn't really a duality there anymore. Awareness becomes aware of itself. Consciousness is conscious of itself. When we use language, immediately we create a subject and an object, and we say, I am aware of stillness. But if you go into it more deeply, you realize that the ultimate I and stillness are one and the same. And you become still. There's just a presence there, It's not you are aware of the presence, you are the presence. And that liberates you from the stuff in your mind, the accumulation of content. It's a wonderful realization to realize suddenly that there is this vast dimension of peace inside you. No matter how mad the content in your mind may be when it gets activated. One way of putting it is on the one hand, usually you're always conscious of something. The consciousness flows into a form, sense perceptions, and then of course thoughts arise and immediately label the sense perceptions. Consciousness becomes a thought. Feelings, emotions may arise. You're concerned with all kinds of things. There's always consciousness goes into this and that and that. Something to look at, something to think about. Of course, there's never a clear looking because you're always looking through this veil of thinking. Well, we're beginning to step out of that. But can you be aware of the simple fact that you are conscious? At this moment. So when we put that into language, one could say, you are becoming conscious that you are conscious. And there's enormous aliveness in that. Wow. But it's peaceful, there's deep peace in that aliveness. Not the nervous aliveness of in the ordinary state of consciousness, when peaceful is associated with sleepiness, but it doesn't have to be like that. There is a peace in you that is vibrantly alive, a stillness that's vibrantly alive. If you don't find that, you've missed the most important thing in your life. That's the pearl of great price that is mentioned in the New Testament, the pearl of great price, the one thing that matters. Everything else secondary. Finding that dimension in yourself. And you can't find it at some future point. Once your life situation gets a little better, once your problems are solved, no. That dimension is absolutely one with what we call the now. In fact, we could say it is the now itself, the formless that is ever present, the space in which everything appears. You are that. So beyond the person with its problems, there is something much vaster in you. And if you don't find that, no matter what you do on the level of the person, you always find frustration again and some form of suffering. No matter how you rearrange your life on that level of the personality, and if you find that dimension, then it changes the entire way in which you experience your life. One thing it does is you realize that everything in your life that you thought was so important is not that important. It's only relatively important. So the seriousness goes out of your life about me and my problems. And many people walk around with a heavy burden of that. Burdened by their stuff. And when you look at them, there's just a very dim light that shines through their stuff. And mostly what's looking back at you is their stuff. So everything is filtered through the stuff in their minds, which is the conditioning, the past inside them, the thought structure. And everything is immediately distorted. Whatever every person you meet, this gets distorted. Every situation you go into gets distorted by that. Because you're looking it through the filter of all that. The me personality, the heaviness of that. The density of that. And nobody, well, there are some now, but in the mainstream culture, nobody teaches you that simple thing, that there is a dimension in you that frees you from all that. At school, nobody has ever heard of it, it seems. Well, in the mainstream culture, now there's a big movement coming in where people are waking up to that. Because that's what it is, the waking up, awakening, a term that's been used for thousands of years already in spirituality, awakening. The Buddha is the one who is awake, that's what the word means. So, of course, ordinarily people think they're all awake already. But if you look, then you see they're not awake. They are in the dream world of incessant and compulsive thinking. So the most wonderful thing then is to wake up and realize who or what you are beyond that accumulation. And then, of course, the mind expects some kind of answer. Okay, now tell me who or what I am beyond that. But the strange thing is, you can't conceptualize that. It's a state of not knowing. Let's go into that. There is such a term in spirituality as self-realization. And ordinarily people would think that's then you truly know who you are. And there's some kind of miraculous revelation that then tells you who you are. It is true that there is a miraculous revelation, but it's not conceptual. So the awakening from the point of view of the conceptual mind is a state of not knowing anymore who you are, because everybody else knows who they are through concepts. Can you embrace the state of simple, aware presence without needing to know anything about yourself, but being that consciously, being who you are rather than knowing who you are, being the consciousness? And that's the state of not knowing from the point of view of the mind. This is what Zen talks about, no mind, it says. No, or it talks about beginner's mind. Now the beginner doesn't know yet. The beginner looks and, doesn't know. It's free of preconceived ideas and concepts. So the beginner's mind is that. And that's not only the beginner's mind, it's also the wisdom, the wise person's mind. Socrates said, all I know for sure is that I don't know, and that's wisdom. All the other philosophers, they were identified with the stuff in their mind. They thought they knew all the answers, all on a conceptual level. Socrates had the wisdom to, because that is the wisdom is to embrace the dimension that is deeper than concepts in yourself, deeper than judgments, deeper than thoughts. And from there you have no knowledge, which is conceptual. There is a depth there, which almost looks like ignorance from the point of view of the conceptual mind, and yet there's a deep knowing in there. And as that arises in your life, you walk around the world in that state of innocence, one could almost say. Not the original innocence that is there before all that mental stuff starts, but a regained innocence, which is also innocence but has a depth to it that the original innocence perhaps does not yet have, because when that's your natural state, you don't even know it. But when you've been through all the delusion and then return to the natural state, there's a knowing there, an added depth to that. So the transformation of consciousness then means that you, as you go through life, more and more the still alert presence that you are operates when you perceive things. You perceive through the still presence. That's the innocence. That's the original, sometimes in some Indian teachings called the natural state. That is also what in other Indian teachings is called the fourth state. This one state is the normal wakeful state, which is really a state of sleep. Then there's the state of dreamlike, normal dream, and there's dreamless sleep. So we have dreamless sleep, the normal dream state, conventional dream state, and the normal wakeful state, which is another form of dream. And then you have the turiya, which means the fourth. It is the fourth state of consciousness, and that is the possibility of being in a state that compared to the normal wakeful state, compared to which the normal wakeful state is a state of sleep. That is a state of clear, alert presence where the unconditioned emerges through you. And that is happening now on the planet to a growing number of humans. And that changes everything. It frees you from the delusion that all you are is the accumulation of stuff in your mind, and the identification with that, which creates a false and absurdly limited sense of self. And all kinds of problems that this absurdly limited sense of self creates wherever it goes. And that absurdly limited sense of self is never at ease, not for long. Never content, not for long. Briefly sometimes, a desire has just been met. It just got something, so some new illusion. And the next day, or a week later, oh, he was supposed to make me happy, but he made me unhappy. Or she, or it, whatever it was. So that the absurdly limited sense of self, that is the identification with the conditioned mind and all the thoughts that continuously go through your head as the voice in the head, which to most people is they think they are that. They think they are the voice in the head. So in the voice, they are the voice. And the voice speaks to you. They're asleep. The voice is talking. They're talking in their dream. Their opinions regurgitated all the time, all the old stuff coming back up. And of course, that's what Jesus pointed to when he said, you must become as little children to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the little children, what is it? They don't have yet the conceptual framework that they impose on the world through which they perceive everything. There's a clarity of perception there that is almost light, you can say. It's light coming through them. No, that light is in you also. It just has been obscured by the stuff. And so you can perceive in the same way and even more deeply than the child, because it's a regained innocence of perception. And you go through the world in that innocent state. As you walk along the street, you look around, people, no need to call them anything, to label them. Trees, there's the sky, shop windows, cars, noise. It's all there. And there is, the background to your sense perceptions is alert stillness. This is becoming a little child, but it's not a regression. And that while you live in such a way, you are free, entirely free of the conditioned personality that causes you so much problems when you identify with it. You're free. So who are you then at that moment when you are just there as a field of perception? You don't know who you are. But on a deeper level, there is a deep knowing, but you couldn't call it anything. Your life itself, your consciousness itself, whatever you want to call it. So you know that. You're the background for all that. You're the space for all that. And of course space you cannot conceptualize. It has no form, there's no form. The essence of who you are has no form, that's the beauty of it. And at first, perhaps, for a while you're able to be the presence, and then you slip back into being the personality. And there's always you can notice then the immediate, totally different energies takes you over. And the parasitical entity, the human mind, is operating. And then oh yeah, there's the two images for theater, tragedy and comedy, the two masks that are symbols for theater, the comedies and the tragedy. And I saw a beautiful cartoon some years ago in a spiritual magazine where there was a serene face, looking a little bit like the Buddha, and with a slight smile, because the Buddha, the most powerful Buddha images have a very slight smile, or at least an emanation of that. There's a peace that comes through. Now, this cartoon, this image was holding, in one hand was holding the mask of the tragedy, and in another hand was holding the mask of the comedy. So you have those two opposites, and behind it, the eternal peace, the unconditioned presence. And then even if there should be some tragedy or comedy in your life, you can still sense the peace underneath it, and you can cry if somebody close to you dies. You can cry and still sense the peace underneath it. So the Buddha is smiling because of that. Just a hint of a smile. It's an all-pervasive peace in the background of your being, in the background. And sometimes it may be so powerful that it almost obliterates everything. And then it's just in the background as you go about your business. But now you have to be careful when you start talking to people that your mind stream does not obliterate the awareness of presence, the awareness of awareness, or the awareness does not obliterate that. The moment you get into a mind stream, start talking, the mind comes in and pulls you. It wants you to go back into a complete identification with it. So their alertness is required, so that even when you have a discussion with someone, not to lose the stillness in the background. And one way of doing it is while you listen, be alert and still. When you listen to another person, alert and still. Really listen, rather than think while you're listening, because then you're not really listening. Listening is a powerful thing. It can be a spiritual practice. You can listen to people, or easier, of course, it's to listen to natural sounds. It brings alert attention. And then you notice there's a sound, and behind the sound is the alert attention. Listening. The most powerful thing is to listen to no sound at all, which is the silence. Wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, suddenly it's all silent around you, and instead of going into thinking about your problems, you become aware of silence and you listen to it. And immediately there's inner silence. The moment you become aware of silence, you've become still. Just need to acknowledge it. And then you'll be surprised that you can actually acknowledge the silence even behind the sounds, even when there are sounds. You go out into nature, there's birds, you can hear the leaves in the trees, water dripping, whatever it is. But underneath it all, there's a silence. And that happens inside you too. There are thoughts. Underneath the thoughts, there's silence. And then the thoughts separate, and there's just silence. And then a few more thoughts may come, and then just silence. That is your practice is to be that in daily life. Just the most wonderful things. It doesn't really matter what you do in your daily life, whether what you do is regarded as fulfilling or not fulfilling. It's what is the energy that flows into what you do? What is the state of consciousness behind the doing? So that's the practice. It's a gradual liberation from the personality, which is the conditioned self. In some cases, it can be a sudden liberation. That's more rare, but that can sometimes happen when you meet death or the imminent death and then survive, or some kind of psychological death. But don't need to wait for that. Die now, here and now. Die to the fictitious self in the head. You can do that now. Death. Oh, if death is not that bad, is it? In fact, it's beautiful. Are you thinking at this moment? Just a question. If you know that you're thinking, then there's some awareness there. It's only from the level of awareness you can know that you're thinking. If you don't know that you're thinking and you're just thinking, then it means you are dreaming. I'll give you just a little bit more space so that you can practice self-observation. Now, you may remember in The Power of Now, if you read it, I talked about a cat watching the mouse hole, waiting for the mouse to come out. Now, the cat watching the mouse hole, if you have observed a cat watching a mouse hole, is completely still, can be still for a long, long time. It sits there. That is probably the transcendent state for cats. Now I'm asking in The Power of Now, can you do the same as the cat watching a mouse hole by putting some attention inside you and seeing, okay, let's see what the next thought is that's going to come up. So the thought is the mouse. You are the cat. Let's see what the next thought is that's going to come up. And if you're very alert, the mouse doesn't come. not coming. You're so alert that the next thought isn't even coming. All you are is presence. And then at some point, probably there will be decrease in your alertness, and you go. What time is it? How much longer are we going to sit here? Or you remember your troubled life. You suddenly remember you have problems. Not this moment, of course, but in your head. And then perhaps presence comes back, and you remember, oh. And you become the cat again, watching the mouse hole. Interesting, the alertness, freedom from thinking through alert presence. And then thought comes back in. And alert presence. Just knowing this is enough to bring about an awakening in your life, that there's the possibility of shift between levels of consciousness. Now, I haven't told this story in some years, so I'll tell it now again. The Zen master. There's a Zen master who used to teach in only one way. He became famous because he never gave any explanation. Whenever he was asked, can you explain the meaning of Zen, please? He would go, yes, say, that was his teaching. And he became famous for his teaching. In another version of this story, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it may well be true. In the monastery where he lived, there was a young boy who was supposed to become a monk, and the young boy would sometimes jokingly imitate the master, and he would go like this. And one day the master saw it, it was in the kitchen, and it's a Zen story. The master got a knife and cut off his finger. And the boy, screaming, ran towards the door, and the last moment the master called his name, whatever his name was, and the master said, "Turn around!" And then the master went. And the story goes that at that moment the boy had satori, a flash of enlightenment. Lost his finger but got enlightenment. And the boy later became a fingerless, well, this finger was missing, teacher of Zen. Attention, presence. But I don't know anything anymore when I'm present, says the mind. No, precisely. But there's wisdom Out of that comes wisdom, out of that come insights, out of that come realization, out of that comes joy, aliveness, inner peace, creativity. Out of that, it all emerges out of that. Even an interesting thought can emerge out of that instead of the compulsive, repetitive thinking, the old records in your head. Suddenly you have an, why did it come? Because there was the space of stillness. Came out of that. Any creative solution, whatever, you have to access that. Or maybe nothing comes. Beautiful. If nothing is needed, nothing comes. You can just be there, feeling fulfilled, joyful, peaceful. It's good enough. And then the rest of your life, you still pretend that you are a person, that's fine. You have your things, talk about, you can see a movie, go to a bar and have a drink. Well, until you're firmly established in presence, I recommend not to drink too much, because then you quickly lose presence. Once you're firmly established in presence, you might even be able to have a few glasses, and not that I don't enjoy more than one glass. I enjoy an occasional glass of wine. That's fine. There was a teacher who gave his disciples alcohol to drink to test their degree of presence. Can you still be present when you feel you're becoming dizzy in the head? That was Gurdjieff, the Russian teacher. Can you still be present? Have another vodka.